Good morning. This is Tom O'Connor. Welcome to the eDiscovery channel. I'm here this morning with Joe Sherman of EDT Software. Good morning, Joe. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tom. Nice to be here. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today.
So I got to ask, what is that over your right shoulder? There's a big slogan written on that wall back there. What is that?
It says, "Make it happen."
Oh, okay. Nice. I like it.
Maybe it's make IT happen. I don't know.
Or make IT happen there. There you go. For those of our listeners who aren't familiar with you or your company, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the background of EDT?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. I'm a lawyer by training. Many years ago, I studied law in Australia, and at the time, actually, it was a crazy idea at the time, but I actually studied computer science as well, which was considered to be a really bizarre combination in those days. But
it still is.
It is actually, yes. But it's led to some interesting sort of career developments, both in Australia and more recently in the US, and some interesting consulting and other work in Commonwealth jurisdictions over the years. Working with law firms and corporations and government agencies. I was a court registrar for a while in Australia for the Court of Appeal in one of the Australian jurisdictions, and I've done all sorts of things in terms of applying technology to law. But my most recent, or my focus right now is on my software company, EDT, which I founded 14 years ago in Australia, and we've expanded internationally since that time. And I recently moved to the United States to expand our operations into this market.
Great. So tell us a little bit about EDT.
Sure. EDT is a software platform that provides case management support for litigation and investigations. You might have noticed I'm purposefully avoiding the word e-discovery in there. I like to talk about case management, you know, and a more holistic perspective on things. And I guess that comes from the fact that a lot of the jurisdictions that most of our clients are in don't really go through the same kind of e-discovery process as the US does. Of course, it's a big and important part of it, but there's a lot that people need to do before and after e-discovery. It's just sort of one component, and I think sometimes if we focus too much on that, it distorts the bigger picture of what we're trying to achieve. But that's getting me on a soapbox topic that we probably don't want to go down at the moment. But EDT is designed to offer end-to-end case management. So obviously e-discovery is a very big part of it, or e-disclosure, as most of my clients call it. And that means everything from processing to analysis. Obviously analytics are very important today. Review, so we have a very full-fledged mature review platform, through to production, and then into trial preparation and presentation in the courtroom. Our platform is used in a number of courts and tribunals internationally, so it's a strong platform for that presentation component as well.
Great. Hey, so that actually leads me to a quick question and aside from our main topic. But since you do so much work internationally, here in the United States, of course, in the last 10 years, we've seen a dramatic drop in the amount of court matters that are actually proceeding to trial. In the federal system, yes. Judge Fasciola, I think that the last statement he made about this was that we're down to under 1, or right around 1% of all cases that are filed actually make it to trial. Is there a similar trend overseas? And I know by overseas that's kind of a broad umbrella. Yes. You know, what happens in Australia, yes, might not happen in Europe. But what's your sense of what's going on in other countries?
Absolutely, it's definitely a trend. I remember when I was a court registrar, actually wearing a different hat in a different era, and well before the e-discovery era sort of kicked off in the early 2000s. The percentage was roughly in civil litigation about 5% went to trial, at least in the Australian jurisdiction. I would imagine it's less than that now, and it doesn't surprise me to hear it's as low as 1% in the US. I think what's happening is that the challenges associated with e-discovery and the cost flow out that has happened in many scenarios is that it's become a digital war of attrition, to use someone else's parlance. I can't remember where I read that, but I like that concept. I don't like that concept actually, a digital war of attrition, because we end up fighting over discovery instead
I need to write that down.
Issues so often.
Go ahead. I don't need to interrupt.
Yeah, so I think e-discovery is largely to blame. You know, I mean, I don't want to be too critical of the whole exercise, but you know, so often we just get into this spiral and this spin of unnecessary costs and, you know, inane kind of processes that just are totally disproportionate to you know, the outcome we're trying to achieve.
Right. Well, that's a nice segue then into the blog post that you wrote. Was it 3 weeks ago or so now, roughly?
Yeah, it was.
It's called "Do Litigators Need to Become Investigators?" I hate to admit this to anybody who's watching, but I actually have a paper copy right here because I was.
I do too.
The dirty secret.
I'm trying to remember what I'm trying to remember what I said in the blog, but anyway, hopefully you'll jog my memory.
Well, no, tell us your friends. It's interesting. Just the title alone is catching. Do litigators need to become investigators? What's your premise here?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that I think, you know, lawyers are inherently some of the most intelligent people around, you know, without a doubt. You know, they're trained to be very analytical. They're trained to be, you know, rigorous and creative and lateral in their thought processes when they're approaching advisory work for their clients. But it's almost as though that whole side of the brain kind of goes into sleep mode when the discovery exercise starts, because all they seem to do, at least, and I have to say, I see more of this, and I don't mean to be critical, but I do see a lot more of this in the US than I see in other jurisdictions. And I've got theories as to why that happens, and we might explore that a little bit. But it seems as though people don't really take advantage of the opportunities that software products have. And this is lots of software products. I'm not talking just about EDT. There are lots of great products out there. But there is so much analytical work that we could be doing beyond the concept of keywords and predictive coding. And it seems that there's a perception that those are the two options as we embrace our discovery planning exercise. And I think it's really unfortunate, and I think clients miss out when lawyers, you know, don't really look beyond those opportunities to what else is out there. So,
and this is of course my my sore point, if you will. I felt, and I felt for a long time, and you can see over my shoulder here is a picture of my old friend Browning Marie, and we beat our heads against the walls and the doors of law school for years, trying to get them to teach more technology that would give them more skills. It seems to me that lawyers in law school really only learn one skill with technology.
Yeah.
That's word searching or its variations in Lexis or Westlaw. And so I think they don't learn the skill set necessary to become more investigative as opposed to litigious. Just my perspective.
Yeah. Yes, no, absolutely. I agree entirely. And I think, you know, part of the problem is often they don't know what's possible. So one of the themes of this article or blog is that they look at everything through the prism of the keyword. So they're using keywords as the device or the tool, the only tool in the toolbox. And a keyword, there are places for keywords, and this is why I guess I get a little frustrated, because keywords can be fantastic if used appropriately, in context, in conjunction with other tools within the entire toolbox. So we don't need to be talking about this black and white decision of do we go to keywords or do we go predictive coding, which is so often here. It's more we have a spectrum of opportunity to look at the case in a very big picture way and decide which technology works. Sometimes analytics, concept searching, those sorts of things will be helpful. And there are all sorts of other techniques that we can use to build our story, to do the analysis. So I think your point about lawyers not actually necessarily having the technology training is absolutely spot on, in that if you don't know what's possible, then how can you know, how can you develop your strategy? And I think all we need to do is expose more lawyers to what's possible. You know, that is sometimes a challenge, I think, because they also like to sort of hand the responsibility for all things technical to the tech guy. Oh, that's not my responsibility. I'm the lawyer. I don't touch the technology. I think those days are gone, you know, and there's lots of developments in terms of ethical requirements in the US and professional requirements now in tech that I think, you know, enforce that concept.
And so do you find that you have to spend a lot of time at the front end of a client engagement discussing this? Do you have to educate the client on their options?
Yes, it's really interesting. I mean, sometimes it's funny, we use the analogy internally within our team that, you know, you feel like you've built a sports car and your client wants to drive it backwards down a one-way street in 30 miles an hour. You know, it's sort of, yeah, you can do that, but, you know.
I don't know. As I pointed out to you before we started, I live in New Orleans. Driving backwards down streets is really not that uncommon here. But
it can be a dangerous exercise.
Yeah, but I take your point. Oftentimes they don't know what their options are, technically speaking. So the old saw, I think you said it in your paper, in your blog, that, you know, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yes, exactly.
It's a bit trite, but it's true. If all you've learned in technology is keyword searching, then that's all you know how to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that leads me to and I don't want to make this an infomercial, but this is the trend that's going on all over the space, certainly the technology space in legal. Our federal rules of civil procedure mandate that matters be handled in a manner, and this is FRCP 1, matters be handled in a manner that's just, speedy, and inexpensive. The least often discussed term. We have a lot of cool technology out there, but nobody really tells us how much it's going to cost. Your company is one of the ones that move towards a flat fee way of dealing this, not a per gigabyte, not a. Just tell us a little about that concept. Why you went there?
Well, yeah, you've struck two chords with me there, Tom. So I'm going to discuss the first one, which is the per gigabyte of volume-based charging, which is just kind of inane. Our mutual friend, Craig Gall, was sharing his views on that with me recently, and he said, you know, imagine buying a vacuum cleaner and paying for every, you know, pound of dust that it collects. You know, it's just crazy to kind of have revenue models that are based on this kind of structure
Oh, no, I'm just going to interject and be a little catty. You know that Craig is a good friend of mine. But really, I'm astonished he knows what a vacuum cleaner is.
Well, they're dangerous waters. I'm not going to wade into. But I don't think it's fair pricing. I mean, we're a software company. Whether you process a terabyte or a gigabyte through our software, it's no consequence to us. It's no extra cost. So, you know, it's not really fair, I don't think, to be charging on that basis. And those clients that have actually sort of realised that that's the way we structure things have benefited greatly in terms of their ability to take cost-effective options to market. And similarly, you know, user fees is just ridiculous. I mean, charging per user per month is a rort. But anyway, that's another topic. But
let me interject quickly.
The other,
just to be fair, and to play the devil's advocate, many of the companies who work in this space came from the old paper days of litigation support, the good old days of summation and concordance, where they made the transition from paper litigation support companies to scanning documents into load
Yes.
files. And so they had that sort of per unit pricing model in their mind. And so I understand where that came from, but I think you're right. The times have changed. Technology has changed.
I just think there's rooms for other pricing models and pricing models that are more reflective of true cost. Sometimes user pricing is fair. Sometimes volume-based pricing is fair. But let's boil it down and actually look at what's the true cost and what's a fair margin, and everyone can do okay out of it. But the other topic you touched on earlier is this concept of just, speedy, and inexpensive. And it's really interesting, Tom. I was doing some research on the various rules in Commonwealth jurisdictions, really, as compared to US jurisdictions.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that principle is invariably in every set of court rules I've looked at, and I've looked at about 20 different jurisdictions. In every set of court rules, that is the overriding number one principle in Rule 1. Now, one thing that it says also in most of these rules is that is the overriding principle, that is the umbrella requirement, and read everything else hereinafter subject to that principle. So if we adopt that approach, then that leads us to the conclusion that proportionality, while it's a very important test and absolutely required, we have to read it subject to Rule 1, which is just, efficient, effective, inexpensive, whatever the terminology is in that particular jurisdiction. And therein lies the problem, I think, because if people ignore number 1 and focus on proportionality, there's sometimes, I would suggest, an escalation of costs to the level that is justifiable given the amount at stake, not given what is required to be efficient or effective. So my point is that sometimes in very high stakes litigation, there is a very inexpensive technical option available. But proportionality, if read as the only rule, can mean that we can inflate the costs and somehow get away with it because it's, a multi-million-dollar case, so we can spend a huge amount on e-discovery. Whereas if we apply an investigative approach to e-discovery, it's sometimes possible to find the most important emails really quickly, or the most important documents very, very quickly, without going through the whole, analytics, load files, batching, predictive coding, without going through all of that. If we are true analysts, and if lawyers are trained to be analytical, then sometimes, perish the thought, you can find 4 or 5 key documents and put your client in a position where you can actually negotiate an effective settlement. Now, that's not proportionate necessarily. Well, it easily satisfies the proportionality test, but it certainly satisfies test number 1. I don't know if I've explained that effectively, but do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and I think that's part of the change in technology overall that we've seen. I had a discussion, and this goes back to what Craig talked about with his article, the Edna Challenge, several years ago. What's a small case? What's a small case budget? What's proportional? So I did a presentation recently for the Oklahoma Bar, and I called my good friend Russ A. Oakley, who's an attorney in Seattle. Russ is a private attorney, but he's also the coordinating attorney for the federal defenders on complex cases. When they have big cases, Russ is the person who handles all the technology coordination for them, so that the court can streamline things. Well, he and I first met maybe 14 years ago, and he had a case in Seattle that involved, and we were trying to talk about it, maybe 5 or 6 million pages of documents, and they had to be scanned and put into a database. Well, that was, at the time, an overwhelming, almost overwhelming. We were able to handle it, or Russ was able to, but it was almost overwhelming. And the budget almost overwhelmed the court. And Judge Marsha Peckman at the time actually put together what was the first sort of joint meeting of the court, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the federal defenders to talk about how to avoid that ever happening again, and come up with the earliest protocol ever to exchange documents. Well, now, 5 million pages, 6 million pages. We were trying to figure out what that would be like, a couple of hundred gigabytes, maybe 300.
Yeah.
That's a small
Yeah,
case
350.
now, right? And we have technology like, we have web-based technology. We have Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services. There's an entirely new base of technology that makes the definition of a small case change and the cost change. So, yeah, I think we have to look at not just budget, but proportionality. And I think, at least at the federal arena, courts in the United States are very aware of that and do that balancing act. Sure. So now lawyers have to know more about all the different tools that are available, because one may not just be faster than the other, but it may be more effective, cheaper, get you a better result. And that's where I think folks like you come in, who can not just sell a product, but advise the client, who then advises the court. And as you mentioned, the whole level of technical competence is the courts are looking at the attorneys to be able to explain not just what they did, but why they did it. So, yeah, it's a whole new world.
It is a new world, and you know what drives me, and what I'm very passionate about in this whole area, Tom, is just promoting that best practice. And you know, it can be any software platform. There are lots of software platforms out there that have very similar functionality. I tend to think ours is very good, but you know, this is about a mindset. It's about a methodology. It's about an approach. And when you see people actually, legal teams or investigators actually using technology effectively to get amazing outcomes and happy clients, you know, it really is quite inspiring. And unfortunately, you know, sometimes you feel like it's a little rare. The e-discovery sector has copped, you know, a lot of flack over the last 10 years. So I think there's opportunity for some great leaps forward for all of us.
Right. So last topic, and I don't want you to give away any trade secrets, but talking of changing technology, what do you see coming down the pipe? You know, we hear a lot of talk about AI, and you know, I'm skeptical of that phrase, but you know, just generally, where do you see some advances coming up?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to integrate natural language processing, and I like you, I avoid the term artificial intelligence or, you know, machine learning, but there is some really great technology that we could now start to look at leveraging. And I'm not talking necessarily about predictive coding. There's a role for that, absolutely, but there are so many other things we could be doing in this area. I've been studying quite a bit in the NLP area over the last year or so, and we've got some pretty exciting stuff happening at the moment. I guess a lot of it is about providing, you know, computer-assisted sort of intelligence throughout the workflow, and the workflow that we think is best practice is something I've tried to capture in this blog and this article, and that is, you know, building your story. The who, what, where, when, why, not at the end of the discovery process in preparation for trial, but actually at the beginning, before you even start collection even. You know, what are we trying to do? Because that gives you the framework, the scaffolding around which you can collect, analyse, review, produce, and then present. And there are ways in which we can use natural language processing and some artificial intelligence artifacts that are well proven in the industry, and there's lots around now in terms of language translation, video interpretation, jargon detection, image analysis, key person analysis. There's a range of things that we can be doing, and similarity analysis even has come a long way with some of the recent NLP algorithms, and ultimately the similarity analysis is what's behind most of the predictive coding engines. But you need to have a framework for it, and I believe the framework is the story, the metaphor of the story, and then knowing which technology to build in along the way to help lawyers or investigators build that story all the way through. So that's I guess our vision and where we want to take our technology moving forward.
That's funny, because when I was talking to my friend Russ Aoki in Seattle, he reminded me that one of the first things I always ask when we start an engagement is I ask the trial attorneys, what do you want to do? what is it you're trying to do here? You're trying to find documents, words, names, people, whatever. And I think we lose track of that sometimes. Start that analysis at the beginning, like you said, not at the end. So a couple of last quick things then. Where might we be seeing you in the near future? Will you be in any conferences, the Georgetown conference by any chance in DC? Or?
I would like to make it to Georgetown. I'm hoping to do so, absolutely. Of course, Illegal Tech in January is coming up very quickly, so we'll definitely be there. I'm heading back to Australia and New Zealand very soon. We've got some great clients there. And a growing market share in those countries, and you know, it's always good to head back home. I don't know where my home is anymore. It's one of my homes.
Yeah, do you have an office in New Zealand?
I'm really looking forward to.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
You have an office in New Zealand?
Well, yes, we have a partner that runs our office there in New Zealand, and we have some wonderful clients in New Zealand. They've been amazing. They're really smart lawyers and just very creative and innovative. And because the litigation budgets aren't as big or as deep pocketed as they are in the US, they can't afford to do inefficient things. So they're very focused on efficiency, which I think is a great thing. And yeah, it's always great to head back home as the weather gets cold in New York.
Well, I have a soft spot in my heart for New Zealand. Gail and I spoke at the New Zealand Law Society. Oh my goodness, it must be 20 years ago when they were just, like many of us, just starting off in technology, and the ABA had a request to send, I don't know, there must have been 6 of us who went over to talk about various types of technology. They had the conference down on the South Island at Dunedin. And this is in the days before the Lord of the Rings, so the island hadn't exploded with people looking for hobbits, you know, much like Ireland, you know, where my family's from, and people running around looking for the leprechaun. It's just a beautiful country, and I found the people very warm and engaging, and very inquisitive about technology. It was a great time. And then I just read an interesting article. Now we're going off on another tangent. I read that there's a great study going on right now that they have discovered. Scientists have discovered an entire underwater continent that they're calling Zealandia. And New Zealand and several of the other islands there are the part of it that's above the water, but it's a massive continent that they believe broke off from Australia, you know, millions of years ago. And they're charting it and drilling down and finding you know, artifacts, not human artifacts, but animal life, vegetation. Yeah, it's really fascinating. And like I said, because of New Zealand, they've dubbed it Zealandia. So, fascinating.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And I guess Hollywood will catch on to that soon, and there'll be a movie arising.
I'm sure there'll be another disaster movie. Yeah. Last but not least, we've talked about you. We talked about the company. How do people get a hold of you? Where do they find you? How do they contact you?
Well, we have a website, of course. discoveredt.com is the best place to go. Our team is global. We've got offices in about 8 countries, but only small offices. Sometimes with only one person, 1 or 2 people. But we are all over the place. So the best place, of course, is the web, discoveredt.com, or LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, Joe Sherman on LinkedIn.
All right, excellent. Well, Joe, thanks again for the time. We really appreciate your time talking to us. I know you're busy, and I have to say, are you in your offices? Is this your?
I am, yes.
New York office? Yeah.
Yes.
So I have to say that as a motorcycle rider, I really admire the dress code of the employee who's sitting behind you.
Well, we have to attract the millennials. We have to attract the millennials and do what we can to make them feel comfortable.
Oh, I'm all for it. Well, thanks again. Great speaking to you, and I hope if you make it to Georgetown, I'll see you in DC in November.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Bye.